There we go. So this session today will be about successfully collaborate with externals in Power BI. You might imagine things like, hey, okay, I can share things with externals. But for our use case today, we'll look at a fictive company called DataMark. And I need a consultancy firm to do work for my company. All following demos that we're going to use during this session will use this same setup. So this fictive company is selling beer, obviously because I like a good beer every now and then. I'm short on staff, and therefore I hired a consultancy firm to do the data analytics for me because I'm not capable of doing that myself. Therefore, we want to introduce you to two personas. The first one is the company representative, being me, and we have the consultancy company representative, being my colleague right here. I got a challenge, and that challenge is basically that I need to get accounts for my externals working for me. But it takes way too long. IT is slow. It takes 3 weeks to get an account requested, and then probably they ask a ton of questions before I finally get it. Also, I don't want to pay their license costs in order to work for me because I'm already paying their hourly rates more than enough. And I'm Dutch, so I like to save money. My project is in a rush, and my business needs insights quickly, so I cannot wait any longer to get this project started. And I want them to be able to start working for me right now, today. I want to share also some information with my suppliers to show them how they're doing and if they're performing well according to my standards. And I'll do that based on a report. And obviously, I don't have premium, so what other options do I have to start sharing content with my suppliers, as well as let other people work for me? So before we can dive into these use cases, I will shortly introduce myself. My name is Mark. I'm a solution architect data analytics at Macaw, a Dutch Microsoft partner. And we're basically doing everything Microsoft. I'm working there mostly focusing on Power BI and everything that relates to Power BI. Connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter. Find me on my own website, data-mark.com, where I blog about everything Power BI. And I'm a 4 year in a row awarded Most Valuable Professional. Together with me today is my colleague.
Yeah, so hello, my name is Adeta, and as Mark mentioned, I'm also working at Macaw. I'm working also mainly with Power BI and everything related to it, and I'm situated in Vilnius, Lithuania. And of course, you can contact me via LinkedIn or other channels. And today's agenda, as you can see, is we will talk about sharing mechanisms and purposes, like when you want to collaborate with others, how to do that, and what are the options. Then, of course, we will touch upon security, things you need to set up. So we will have some demos for you. And the last thing about licensing, because as you know, money is quite important. And as Mark said, since he is Dutch, he really needs to know where to save his money. So overview of Power BI services. Probably all of you already know that. So we have a lot of stuff there. So we have administration, security, gateways, workspaces, contents, apps, and all other nice things there. So if you want to share, first you need to think maybe at a workspace level, you need viewer permissions, so you need to know how to set up that. Also, the other option for sharing is direct sharing, so just send the link. And the last and probably the best option is publish a Power BI app and share it with, via it. So, of course, there are a few things that you can think about. So, do I want to share and for users only to view it and interact with reports, dashboards, apps? And in that case, I can publish to web, share directly, or embed in the website. And another thing is if I want to collaborate. So for example, if Mark shares his data with me, and I would like to create something of my own with that data, and plus add my data to it. So then there are some other things. So as I said, you can share data sets, of course, workspaces. So again, everything in that, and share data flows, but This is a little bit trickier, not that easy. So what about Excel? As you know, there are many people that still using Excel, still saying, so if I had this, for example, if Mark shared with me, can I still download to Excel? Yeah, these options are still available to you, so you can use Analyze in Excel, Connected Excel tables, also an option, so we don't forget about you. And now regarding internal versus external. So what you need to know. So if I am an external, or I should probably start from internal. So this is a little bit simpler. If I am internal user, I probably have an Azure account. I need some license, and I need dataset access. But this is without anything additionally. I don't need to set up anything there. But if I am external person, then there is another story. Then I need guest account for the Azure. I need Power BI license, or I can use my own. Then there are additional tenant settings and additional setting at the dataset level. So now internal versus external and some use cases that you can think of. So for example, there was a company that had a media agency that did all the media stuff there. So on YouTube, Instagram, and other media channels. And they wanted to bring together their financial data, of course, because you want to know if this campaign succeeded or not, how many clicks you had, how many views, how much money you spend it there. So everything is possible if you are using the approach that we will show you today. The other thing is then you have distributors that sell ingredients to the vendors, and vendors use that to create their finished product and sell to customers. So as you can see, there are a few things there. And of course, you can have a report only for you, but then you can add the report that you can see if customers are using all the products and what kind of ingredients are the most popular, or the products are the most popular. So again, you can add the whole overview of this process.
So let's have a look at what the flow of steps looks like when we want to work with externals in Power BI. As a very first thing, a starting point is, hey, I want to start collaborating with these externals. And the first question we should ask ourselves is, does this user already has an Azure Active Directory B2B account with access? Azure Active Directory is the authorization mechanism that we're using here, and that's widely spread across all the Microsoft services that we know and love. So if the answer is no, and this user does not have an Azure Active Directory B2B access yet, we should start with sending an invite to join our organization and join our tenant. Based on this authorization, we'll start the authorization flow, which we'll deep dive a bit later. In case the user has access, the next question we should ask ourselves, does this user only need to view content or also edit and create content in our environment? In case the consulting company also needs to create new content, build new reports, build new data sets maybe, then we also need to think about some other steps that we have to take. If not, we can directly share the report, dashboard, or the app as we explained in the different sharing mechanisms. If we also need to build content, then there is basically the next question, is there an existing data set? If the data set is already in place, we can directly grant build permissions to that data set. And based on these build permissions, the user can start building a new report on top. If there's no data set in place, we should question whether there is a data flow or data mart available. If so, workspace permissions will suffice. If not, we basically leave the area of Power BI, and we need to think about access to the data sources behind it, being a SQL database, Azure Synapse, or whatever you use as a data source. If the data flow or data mart is available, we can simply grant permissions on workspace level with sufficient permissions to build new content, being either admin, contributor, or member. My advice would be never make an external an admin, but it is an option. If all these things are in place, we can start creating content. and the user, either internal or external, can start building new reports on top of existing data sets, or even start building new reports on top of existing data flows or data marts, if they are. Though there are a few considerations that we have to make. Basically, do we allow everyone to invite externals to the organization? Especially in larger organizations, you could question, who do I specifically allow to invite others to my organization? Right here, you see a Power BI tenant setting, which your Power BI service administrator can apply to define a security group of individuals that are allowed to invite externals to the organization. Think about a process around this if you start setting this up in your organization. So you know what the process looks like, and also the people that are in this exception group know what to do and which steps to take. That brings us to Security 101. Let's start with the principle of the least privileges possible. So who actually needs to have access to what, and we only grant access to that and nothing more than that. So as I already mentioned a few times, is Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is the authentication protocol that we're using, the authentication service that is widely shared and used across all Microsoft services, being maybe your Office 365, Dynamics 365 if you use it, Power Apps, but also Power BI. Azure Active Directory is basically also used in Power BI, and you might know it as the OAuth 2 authentication flow, or the organizational account if you sign in to one of your data sources. You might not be fully aware that you already have this in place or are already using this, because Active Directory also exists on premises. Power BI service is a cloud service, so they need to be in sync. And keep in mind that guest accounts only exist in your Azure Active Directory in the cloud. They do not exist on premises. You can sync these two worlds, but typically externals are only existing in the cloud. In order to invite OData to start working for my organization, I have to start with sending an invite. And I have to start with sending that invite from my Azure Active Directory and invite her account to my organization. That's the very first step we have to take. After the invite, basically we set up a B2B collaboration. Two businesses that can collaborate with each other, and each of the authentication principles that I configured in my environment will also apply to the guest tenant. So if I set up Azure Active Directory authentication based on multi-factor authentication, and with multi-factor authentication, you always need to open up your Authenticator app and click Approve. That will, as of that point, also apply to the guest accounts, even if the company that hosts that guest account has a lower set of security requirements. Basically, if you have that B2B collaboration set up, you will see that different applications will be in a company portal. So if you sign into a guest tenant or an external tenant, you will see all applications that are being made available. But surprise, for Power BI, it works slightly different. For Power BI, you can potentially see that icon popping up there, but if you just go to app.powerbi.com, it doesn't show up directly. And you have to use a specific URL to end up in that guest tenant. So talking about the authorization, let's have a look what steps we need to take there before we run into this first demo. The very first thing we need to do is, from that Azure B2B invite, and I just sent that invite, is basically the question that we should ask is, does this organization have an Active Directory already? Active Directory for B2B needs to be both Azure Active Directory. It cannot be Google, it cannot be AWS or any other service. It needs to be both a Microsoft Azure Active Directory. If the answer is no, the user will be prompted to create a new tenant in Azure Active Directory tenant. This tenant needs to be set up from scratch, and basically a tenant means everything you have in your mail address behind the ad. So in my case, at datamark.com, or for a company at macaw.nl. If there is already an Azure Active Directory in place, the next question would be, does this guest already have a B2B identity in my organization? So is this user already been invited in the past? If not, the user is prompted to create an identity with a guest account, and therefore needs to comply to my security standards. So set up Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication with the Authenticator app, or maybe even with other type of notification on the phone. If yes, the user can sign into the Active Directory, and with that can get access to the apps that the user is allowed to interact with, being Power BI in our example. That brings us to the first demo. And during the first demo, I want to quickly show you how you can add new users. So right here, we ended up in the Azure portal. And let me zoom in a little bit. In the Azure portal, you can see that I'm now signed into the tenant, being at datamark.com, and I can easily switch here tenants. In a second, you will see that this doesn't really exist in Power BI. Azure Active Directory is also available here. On the left-hand menu, we can directly navigate into Active Directory, and here we can see a list of users. And all these users can either be internal or external in my tenant. By the user type here, you can see who is a guest user, so being an external, and who's a member. A member by default is an internal account. So you can see a full list of users right here, and all these users can be added to my tenant and apply to my company standards. If I want to add a new user, you'll see two options. Either create a new user in your organization, so in my current organization, I can only do this if I'm a tenant administrator. The account that I'm using right now has all the permissions in my tenant and can do everything that I want. However, for most users, the top option will not be available. If I want to invite external users, I have to use the second option. And right there, I can start filling in the details that we need. And that starts with the name and the mail address. So we are inviting a user, and that email will be sent out in a bit. Optionally, I can also fill in a first name and a last name, and if I really want to, even a personal message to explain why I'm inviting you to the tenant, what's the purpose of it, and what we're going to do. If I want, I can also directly assign this user, based on the invite, to specific Active Directory groups. For example, a group for external guest editing in Power BI. Also, I can add roles to it, and roles can be specific Azure Active Directory roles. Typically, this does not apply to a guest user, because this is often related to administrator permissions. I can specify some more information, but this is all optional. So for now, we can just click Invite. As soon as I click this button, you will see an error appearing. Oh, actually it works, but probably because I use the abbreviation of your mail address. Normally, if you use the same mail address again, you will see a prompt that's telling you, like, hey, this user already exists. So if you have an organization with thousands and thousands of users, you can just type in a mail address and see if the user already exists, instead of scrolling through that list manually and trying to find it. With that, let's jump to the other side, so to the external side. And let's have a look at what it looks like if this user gets invited to an organization.
Yeah, so this is where you can see the email invite from Mark. So this is what I got. Also, I have here an accept invitation button. Of course, I'm not pressing it now because I already did that. But you really need to press that button, because if you don't accept the invitation, you won't be able to use any of the things we will show you later. Yeah, so we can move on.
Maybe you can also show what it looked like if you open a Power BI service.
Yeah, so for example, if I accepted this invitation, and if I go to my Power BI services, here I'm connected with my account. I won't be able to see a lot of things there if there is nothing there yet. Of course, now we updated some things, but still I can see the Maco logo here. So this is my company as a consultant, not Mark's, as you can see that. But if I have very special link where there is an tenant ID, then I can have another option. And here, Mark will show a little bit later how to get this link. But here, where is CTID, so tenant ID, this one means that here I am at datamarks.com, as you can see. So here I am at my client's tenant.
Yes. So let's move back to my setup in my tenant. So if I go to app.powerbi.com, I will directly be signed in based on direct access. There's one difference that we see here, and that's basically this bar here on the left side. At this moment, Odetta only had viewer permissions, meaning she could enter my tenant and see that she is able to view stuff, but she cannot directly navigate into workspaces or anything like that. That is based on some specific settings that we configured, which where I only allow viewing content and not directly editing content. The link that Odetta needed in order to access my tenant is a very specific one, which needs to be fetched from, I always forget where it exactly is, help and support, and then about Power BI. The URL that you will find here includes your tenant ID. There's this slight difference here between collaboration, B2B collaboration in Azure and in Power BI. Because in Power BI, I cannot simply just navigate through a different tenant. What I'm actually able to do right here in Azure, where I can just switch to a different tenant, for example, switch to my Macaw account, or switch directory, just switch to a completely other tenant, but still with my own account. In Power BI, that is slightly complicated, and therefore you need that very specific URL. So, can externals get the data out of Power BI? We just already heard from Odetta that yes, you can still export to Excel. Yes, you can still use connected tables in Excel. However, you can consider to block this. As a Power BI tenant administrator, I can configure things like blocking export to Excel for my entire organization, or maybe saying I allow it for my internal users, but it's an exception group for all the external users. So everyone that lives outside of my tenant is not able to export. Similar to downloading reports, because it doesn't stop with Excel. Of course, if they have sufficient permissions, they can still download the PBIX files and whatever they want. Again, like almost every Power BI tenant setting, you can configure an exception group where you can say, okay, all my internal users can do this, but in the exception group, we put the externals. Still, I have my doubts if this is the right setup, because I rather allow people to do stuff, but monitor it, because they will always find a way to do it. Nowadays, we all have a smartphone. Just make a picture from the screen, and if you select it on the screen, you can still get the data out. So rather allow people to do stuff, but monitor it, and therefore set up proper monitoring so you can regularly review if everyone accessing your tenant still needs access, and approach the solution owners and tell them like, hey, you shared your content with a bunch of externals. Is this still sufficient? Is this still what it should be? And is this still appropriate configured? Or maybe we should adjust their permissions. As an administrator, you might want to review the audit logs every now and then to see what they are doing, and also to monitor who of your internal users is sharing externally, because this is nicely captured in the audit logs. So, what needs to be done before we can get this all started? What specific configurations do we need in Power BI? It all starts with some basic tenant settings. It starts with allowing Active Directory guest users to access Power BI for me. As soon as this is set up, the next step is to show Azure Active Directory guests as suggested people in the service. As soon as I share something with direct share or publish an app, I can list down who I want to give access. By default, only users living in your tenant will show up and not guest accounts. With a specific toggle, if you switch that, also guest accounts will show up. And a third one is whether you invite people to the external to your organization or not, and who do you allow to do this? So who can a specific security group? Who do you allow to invite externals and add them to your shared data sets, reports, or whatever? There are a few specific configurations involved. A few specific configurations that we will need later on in order to make this collaboration successful. It starts with using data sets across workspaces. This is everything to do based on how an external user from Power BI Desktop will be able to connect to a data set that lives in my environment. More about that in a second. The second one is allow specific users to turn on external data sharing. So do we allow everyone to do this or that specific security group? As a third one, allow Azure Active Directory guests to edit and manage content in your organization. And that's the difference we just saw with Odetta account and mine. Do we only allow to view content, and you don't have the left-hand ribbon, or can they also manage content and access the workspaces? And the fourth one is, can guest users also work with shared data sets in their own tenant? So can Odetta connect to a data set that lives in the data mark tenant, but publish it in the Macaw tenant? We'll also see that in a demo later.
Yeah, and now what external users need to do. As I showed you before, you need, of course, to accept the invite. So that's already shown. Then you need to enable preview features in Power BI Desktop. So this is still a preview feature, but you can use it. So don't forget that, because otherwise you won't be seeing any external data sets in your Power BI Desktop. And going to the demo. So first demo is about if I had the data set and I would like to, for example, add my own maybe financial data or some other data to it. Can I do it, and how can I do it? Yeah. So here you see a report that I used Mark's data set. So I am here already set up everything, and what I used is just get data and Power BI data sets, and also added here production managers' names, because at Mark's data, there wasn't any names to this. So I added that, and I can publish this to my tenant. So it's very simple, as you would work with your own data. So press publish, and then you will go to your tenant. We'll see that. So here, and just simply like that, you have some data there and a report. And of course, as you know, if you are using two different data sources, then you have a composite data model there. So this is, again, one thing. And now, for example, you could wonder, if I go to lineage, can I see where my data is coming from? Is it coming from some other tenant or not? So this is, again, one interesting thing. So if I go there, I don't really see it. As you can see, I see that I have some data set with probably RLS because it tells me so, but there are nothing that suggests that this is from somebody else's tenant. Of course, you can notice that there is a tenant ID, but it's not that visible. Yeah.
Maybe one thing that we can add there is also, let's have a look at the other side. Let's have a look in my tenant if I can see that my content is used outside my own tenant. So let's navigate into that workspace where we have this data set, which is this one. So right here in this workspace, we have that data set ready that Odetta just showed. And in this case, this data set is shared via the managed permissions. And you can see that Odetta has access with her account. In this case, she's also a workspace member, which we will need for a later demo. And next to that, we can also have a look at the row-level security, because row-level security nicely kicked in, although she has workspace permissions. And we can see that if we go to the security tab, and we have a look at, where is it? Right here. That we can just list external users as well, right here in the setup. Right here, you will also see that I am allowed on my tenant to show external guest users. So as soon as I start typing a name, I can see, based on the hashtag ext hashtag, that it is actually an external user. I think actually that I had to look at this workspace because you had USA and Canada. So let's have a quick look here. USA. Yeah, here you are. So row-level security kicks in, no matter if it is internal or external. We also wanted to know if I can see it based on the lineage. Well, if we look at lineage right here, I can see that it connects to the sources that I used. I got a data set here and a report, but I cannot see that there's also something connected outside of my tenant. Let's have a look at the show impact across workspaces, because maybe there it shows up. Well, unfortunately, today we cannot see yet that this data set is also used external. So even though the data set is used in the Macaw tenant right now, there's no way for me to figure that out other than going to the audit logs and see which user is interacting here. Those are a few specific things that you have to keep in mind. In the permissions of this data set, we can see that currently there are only workspace viewer and app build permissions assigned. These build permissions are required in order to build a new report on top, both for internal and external users. In this case, also via the app granted, and I also granted workspace viewer permissions. There's another thing that we didn't show yet, which is about how do you actually connect to that data set and how do I identify whether this data set is an internal or an external one. That is something we have to do from Power BI Desktop. Let me open quickly a Power BI Desktop instance. Because no matter with which account I'm signed in, I can still see the external data sets. And as Odette already showed, the connection is as simple as going and connecting to Power BI data sets. However, there is a slight bug in Power BI Desktop in this month's release. Because the funny thing is, you don't see the external shared stuff, which should be a nice box here. There should be just a simple box that tells you to filter directly down to external shared data sets. So you can directly see only the ones that are available. And to show you that it's actually a bug, we quickly switch back to Odette, and you see that there nothing shows even. I came across this bug last week. Hopefully it will be solved in a March update. However, it's a sort of glitch, because if I sign out and sign in again, it shows up, I can connect, and if I then click the button again, it disappears again randomly. So I think that is the fun of working with Power BI and a product that updates every month. But keep in mind that this is at least where you should be able to see it. Jumping back to the slides, we got another demo for you prepared. Because now Odette used the data set from my tenant and was able to publish it in her tenant. But what if we look at the scenario that we started with today? The scenario where we said, I want externals to work for me and be able to publish content in my tenant. Because I don't want to give them an account on my tenant. I don't want to pay their licenses and all that stuff. But still, the result set needs to be ending up in my environment, not in theirs. So that's the second demo we want to show you, and there's a nice little trick involved here. So let's jump back to Odette, where she will be able to publish something to my tenant with her guest account.
Yeah, so now we have not that beautiful report, so don't mind it. But for example, if I put some data there, so now again I have only Mark's data here. I can just check it maybe, but since it's data set, you won't see a lot of things there. But for example, of course, it's not working, but I have some data there. And as Mark said, I would like to put all of this to his tenant. So not mine, but data Mark's. So now what I should do, I need to sign in. This is, again, doing normally as I would. So adding my account there, pressing continue. Hopefully that works and no more bugs will appear. And now there is a trick that I need to go and press use another account, because usually I would just have this one, but no. And here is sign in options. And here there is an option sign into an organization. So I need to show what kind of organization I need to go there. So this would be domain name datamark.com. And now I can select my Macaw account again. And I am signed in here, only I cannot see the picture. So this is the indicator that I am not at my own tenant, because Mark doesn't have my pictures there. And now, as simply as that, I just pressing publish. Of course, I need to save this. And now I am able to see the workspaces that Mark shared with me. So here I am as a member, probably, as you said. And which one should I choose?
Let's pick the second one.
Yeah. So the client needs me to inform what kind of workspace I should use. And of course, I need to replace, since we already did that. And at some point, we can switch to your tenant and see if you can see it.
Yes. Well, you just showed a successful message, so let's jump back quickly and navigate back into the Power BI service and have a look here. Quickly refreshing the browser, and the report should be called Report from Consultant Published to the Client Tenant. Way too long name, but right here it is. If I open the report, I can directly see it is updated today, the 16th of the 3rd of March, and we nicely have the same report here. Also, if I go back to that workspace, I can see in the settings that there's always a dataset owner, right? So the owner is the person that configures the refresh, assigns it to a gateway, and all of that. In this case, you'll see that it is still on my account name because the dataset was already there and it is overwritten. If the data is published as very first time, you will see the name of the external right here. And that's what you will see now with my Macaw account, because I also had my own Macaw account enabled as guest user. And this is actually very important, because typically an external only works for me for a month or maybe a few months, but then it stops. Then if you do it correctly, you disable that account so that user is no longer allowed to enter my tenant. That means if that user is the owner of the data set, that from that point onwards, it will not refresh anymore. So typically, the user in the home tenant, so my user in my own tenant, should take over this refresh and simply do a takeover and assign it to the gateway or fill in the credentials for the data source if needed. If you don't do this, it will just stop refreshing. In case I was already the owner and OData just published a new version of this and overridden the previous one, my credentials will still apply for the refresh and will remain to be the owner, just because only the logic is overwritten and not the ownership. So let's jump back to the slides.
And now we can talk about licensing. So what about it? So shared contact is backed up by Power BI Premium. So as you know, you can have Premium and share all that without any licenses assigned. But as we mentioned at the beginning, for example, Mark don't have Premium, and he doesn't want to buy it since it's expensive. So hosting tenant can assign a pro license. Now again, for Mark, it's not an option since he don't want to buy the licenses for me, because if I want to, as you know, to create something, I need a pro license. I cannot be only viewer. So then I can bring my own license and work with that. As you saw, I was using Macaw account, so I didn't use like datamart.com account. And of course, we have another decision tree. So regarding licensing, first you need authentication. So we already showed it, how it looks like. And now you need to ask, do you want that the user only view your content or not? If no, do you want to assign a pro license? Or, of course, it could be a PPU license, so premium per user. If not, so again, my only option is external users use their own license, so I bring my own. If yes, so you buy the licenses and assign to the external user. And now, if you want that people would share and collaborate with your data, then you can think of, do you have a premium? So do Mark has a premium? As we know, no. So again, we are going back to that. If yes, you can assign premium to workspaces for external, and then no person-based licensing is required. And now the last remarks.
Yes. So let's have a look at some wrap-up and remarks when we look at working with externals in Power BI. Of course, we want to make your life easier with all these decision trees, so we put them all nicely connected together in one, so you can just click through it on your own behalf. You don't have to make a picture. At the end, we'll have a slide with resources where we have the link where you can directly download it and where we'll keep it up to date. Or you just scan the QR code now quickly. They all directly have it. There are a few things that you have to keep in mind that help you to get started. First, think about the purpose of sharing. Do they only need to view content or also collaborate with you and build new content on top for you? If they need to build new content on top, then think about the licensing, as we just explained. If you work with external vendors, you do not always need to provide that internal license. As we've seen, you can also work with your external license and publish to that same environment. But again, security 101, principle of least privileges possible. Don't grant them more permissions than they need. Never make them a workspace administrator, I would say. And consider the way how you share content if it is only about viewing. Go for viewing via an app, direct share, workspace, and if they need to build content, dataset build permissions.
And now considerations and limitations, because this is also very important. So again, if you are using Pro or Premium per user and you're having a trial, then you cannot use this external sharing. If your connected and hosted, if you can call it, tenants are not on the same region, the data can cross regions. Cross-sovereign cloud scenarios are not supported in this case, and you cannot share from personal workspaces. So this is why we had the separate workspaces done. And of course, as I said, now I had a composite model, so direct query and import query. So direct queries and composite model limitations also apply. So everything in the Microsoft limitations and considerations.
To that last one, that's a really important one to add another note to that. Because as soon as I connect with an external account to a data set that lives outside of my tenant, it will automatically convert into direct query. You cannot use live connection. That's only supported within the same tenant. So that might have a performance implication when I start connecting over direct query, and the queries might be a bit slower.
Yeah, and here we will provide you with all the links, of course, so resources where you have Power BI security wallpaper, then security deep dive, this is very good one, also how to publish that, so small video, and of course our decision tree. Also, you can find it in GitHub.
That was all we wanted to share with you today. Of course, we'll make sure that all the material becomes available. If you go to either one of our GitHubs, you will find the deck right after the session. We'll make sure that it's published there. For now, we want to thank you for attending. Ask questions if you like, and please fill in the session feedback. Are there any questions? No? Also no questions online? No?
No.
OK. Once again, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Have a nice rest of the conference.
Thank you. And see you.